It's 3 minutes after 10, and I'm going to forget probably on 6 or 7 occasions today that it's Tuesday as opposed to Monday. So bear with. Can we do this? I don't know. Do you think we can do this? We are all victims of footballification. If the bloke what invented it as a phrase is a victim of it, then what hope is there for everybody else? Footballification. If you're not familiar with the concept, is the idea that you are so blindly loyal to your own team that you cannot admit any wrongdoing on their behalf, and you are adamant that the other lot are appalling. And I think, in a way, we all suffer from it. It's easy to see it in football. I catch myself occasionally shouting at the referee when I'm at Kidderminster Harriers, and even though I'm pretty clear that our lad was banged to rights, you sort of suggest that he should have gone to Specsavers or something like that. Happily, I don't think I haven't been at it long enough or invested deeply enough to be, and the stakes that Kiddie play for, very recent rare exception, are rarely high enough to get truly impassioned. But you see it on the telly. If you don't follow football, you've caught a glimpse of it on the telly. The face is contorted with rage and hatred, anger, fury. And the minute the final whistle goes, 80% of those people will be back to completely normal and placid existences. But there is something about loyalty to your team colours. I suppose I'm possibly over-egging this particular pudding, but hey-ho, I haven't been on air for 3 days. It's like I get a backup of verbiage. It's how wars happen, isn't it? What are you going to go and risk your life for? Just because the king's fallen out with his cousin, the Kaiser, in the First World War, or Henry V wants to co-opt some bigger bits of France. Why am I going to go and risk my life for that? Well, I've been persuaded to hate the French, or I've been persuaded to hate the Germans, just like I've been persuaded to hate the other team. And I think that British politics, post-Brexit and in the run-up to Brexit, is the most footballified it has ever been. I think it's very sad. I think it's inevitable. It will eventually dissipate. It's beginning to dissipate now because people on the pro-Brexit team are recognising that their team have cheated and lied and broken all the rules of football and done all manner of things to win a victory that turned out to be completely hollow. But that's a conversation for another day. The conversation for today is about the footballification of party politics and a particularly cultish character called Boris Johnson, and whether or not we can de-footballify that. The best way to try is to imagine the same things that are happening to him happening to somebody else, and you therefore having to wonder whether your response would be different. We are talking about the fact that the government today has until 4 p.m. to hand over Boris Johnson's unredacted WhatsApp messages and diary entries to the COVID inquiry. It doesn't start for 2 weeks. Johnson will be among those giving evidence. They've been given his messages, but with many parts blanked out. The inquiry insists that failing to release the unredacted material would be a criminal offence. I presume, and I'm open to correction on this, that is because it is a judicial... It's not a judicial... Well, anyway, Baroness Hallett, who's chairing the COVID inquiry, is adamant that it would be a criminal offence not to supply discussions between the Prime Minister and his advisers about all manner of issues. It started on the Sarah Everard story. You remember that the protests following the murder of Sarah Everard, that was redacted. Conversations between the Prime Minister and his advisers about that, but they've now been unredacted. And as Baroness Hallett says, it was not a promising start. So it looks like ministers are not going to provide the unredacted message, or the Cabinet Office is not going to provide the unredacted messages, and the inquiry remains adamant that this would be a criminal matter. As we have seen, of course, Boris Johnson and his closest advisers think nothing of breaking laws. They do it as casually as the rest of us have breakfast. So quite where this leads us, I do not know. I genuinely do not know. The footballification is this. The footballification is this. I really want to have a conversation, and I'm going to redact myself I think, in the first instance. I really want to have a conversation about the issue and not the individual. So there are two reasons for that. Number one, it's a hell of a lot more interesting and important to do it in that way. And number two, it's not just him. It's other ministers as well. There are not just Boris Johnson messages that the government is keen to keep quiet. I mean, given that Rishi Sunak was Chancellor of the Exchequer during this period, the motivation for him not wanting everything to go public is pretty clear as well. There's a lovely paragraph in the Times. It says, although Mr. Johnson's reputation is beyond salvaging, an unredacted release of ministerial chat may yet send others to the scrapyard. A trawl of the thousands of messages flying between him and some 40 of his lieutenants, including the current Prime Minister, the former Prime Minister, Liz Truss, and Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, over a period of 2 years, is unlikely to leave everyone unscathed. 9 minutes after 10 is the time. What do you think? 24 notebooks with contemporaneous notes, WhatsApp messages between Johnson and cabinet ministers, advisors and civil servants. I haven't been able to clarify, and forgive me for this, whether or not they would definitely go public by dint of being given to the inquiry. I don't think so. I think that no, it would be that there would ultimately be publication of any material used in the inquiry. Again, there's room for confusion there, isn't there? Because a lot of the messages wouldn't be used in the inquiry, but they might have been given to the inquiry. So I'm not 100% clear on if there was, for example, a WhatsApp message that said, I can't believe Hancock ate all the pancakes and I had to eat my crispy duck with my fingers. What a little scrote he is. That kind of message. I don't know whether that would go public. But of course, given that Matt Hancock gave all of his WhatsApp messages to that frightful Oakshott woman, we've probably already seen that one anyway, if you were interested in the divvying up of a Chinese delivery at Downing Street during the dog days of the COVID crisis. So there's that. The bits that were not... Although it's work accounts, these are work phones, aren't they? But there's that question, whether or not privacy would somehow be impinged. But then that depends upon what's in it, doesn't it? That depends upon what's on it. So this is the bit I am really intrigued by. And I am conscious of the fact that people died during this period of time. And my initial reaction to that is they have every right to know everything that was being passed between the people in charge of our response to COVID-19, a response that many people believe would have seen considerably fewer deaths if it had been a little quicker, for example, in the very first instance, or a little more consistent throughout. And seeing those messages, would I imagine, and you're listening to the programme as someone who lost someone and wonders whether you had to, whether it was truly inevitable, your views on this will be particularly interesting. But I think everybody's views are interesting because we've all got some degree of skin in the game. I've mentioned that. I've mentioned the possibility of you listening to this as someone who was bereaved. Because this question that I'm about to ask you may sound a bit silly, but I don't think it is. I just think there's a framing that lends itself to levity, but I want to focus upon the serious side of it at least as much. And this is where setting aside your footballification loyalties is going to be helpful. So I'm taking my scarf off, my anti-Boris Johnson scarf off. I mean, it's not even a scarf anymore. It's a coat of many colours. Every criticism of him has been proved so gloriously correct in recent months that it doesn't even count as an opinion anymore, does it? Thinking Boris Johnson's awful. It's just counting. But I'm taking it off because I can't currently see the problem unless you can tell me what's going to be in it that will make me think, oh yeah, no, that shouldn't be published or shouldn't even be supplied to the COVID inquiry. So, genuine question, what could be in these messages that would make the government, and Boris Johnson in particular now, not part of government, so would make Boris Johnson and members of the current government so desperate for the messages not to see the light of day? I think that given that they are desperate to deny us the opportunity to see these messages, we are perfectly entitled to speculate upon what it is they are trying to hide. And your answers to that question will push us towards a firmer conclusion on whether we should be on the side of the inquiry or the side of the government, which has until 4 p.m. today to hand over unredacted WhatsApp messages and diary entries. And that's why the footballification point was the one that I started with, because I want to hear from people who are sympathetic to Boris Johnson as well as people who are not. But I want to hear from either camp the reasons why, based upon a speculation, the reasons why it shouldn't happen. Or, of course, the reasons why it should. And I can't see any way into that contemplation that's better than this. What could they be trying to hide? 0345 6060 973. What sort of content are they so scared of it seeing the light of day? 0345 6060 973. Does it matter, for example, that Matt Hancock gave all of his to that Oakshott woman? And therefore the sort of privacy argument begins to look a little bit flimsy, perhaps, but not necessarily. What's going to be in it that they're so keen for you and me not to see? Quite a few of you telling me that you've seen assurances that stuff that's not remotely relevant to the inquiry would not be published. I haven't been able to pin that down conclusively. I'm sure we will do between now and 11 o'clock. But I don't think, Jacob ate all the prawn crackers is likely to see the light of day. I could be wrong about that. But what is it that they don't want us to see? Because at the moment, I can't think of a smoking gun other than stuff we're already aware of or suspicious of, like the let the bodies pile high argument, or the let it run through the country and see. Do you see what I mean? What do you think they're so scared of you seeing? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. And then the second question, which I think needs to at least nod towards the first one, unless you've got a really powerful privacy argument that currently eludes me, because they are public servants acting in public service. Where does the privacy argument come in on this? I don't know, but I've heard people say it with great confidence, so there must be something in it. Admittedly, all the people I've heard say it with great confidence are also pro-Boris, or were pro-Boris Johnson and pro-Brexit. So I don't know how much credibility you can give them in any other field now. But what do you think about the government's determination to keep secret huge parts of its communications about the biggest peacetime crisis the country's ever faced? Shall I tell you the number again? 0345 6060 973. What do you think they might be trying to hide? Okay? And possibly independent of that question, do you think there is a case for keeping huge portions of these messages private? It's 10:17. Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 20 minutes after 10 is the time. James, they're hiding incompetence and lies. Fulvio in Hastings writes, a raped woman must give her phone to the police with the knowledge that her private correspondence may be used to challenge her claims. I'd forgotten that. Sarah in Fife reminds us it's the timing, when they knew and what they knew. I bet there are loads of WhatsApp messages when Johnson was supposedly on his deathbed. Crikey. With such a morally bankrupt person, the possibilities are endless, says Paul, which I don't think anyone can really argue with. Simon suggests they're scared of us seeing the truth about what was happening in this country. And Harry in Portahomac? I should have just made a place up. Harry's text says, Johnson's WhatsApps are opening a dark door. The COVID secrets are the opening door to the great PPI frauds, potentially, where the messages might even be incriminating legally. It's an attempt to cut it all off at the pass. And Orange says, James, they are terrified of us knowing the contempt in which they hold us all. Not a lot of defence so far. So what is the reasons, the supportive reasons for the government refusing to hand over Boris Johnson's unredacted WhatsApp messages and diary entries? James is in Cheltenham. James, what would you like to say?
Well, I'm not sure I've got a convincing argument that they shouldn't be published.
But do I sound sincere when I say that I want to hear them?
Yes, you do.
Good. Because I really, really do. I don't want people to feel, I'm not normally in the mood for Boris Johnson fangirling, but today I would love to hear a proper, cogent argument as to why they shouldn't be published. But it's not going to come from you. What is?
Well, so let me be clear. I do think they should be published, and I think not least because we know there have been lies around this already. So I think all this delay and trying to, find some loophole or something like that to prevent releasing evidence about this when we know there are lies, and I think, this thing needs to be exposed to the light of day, is very important.
I think that seems obvious. That's why I'm in that weird position where you sort of think, well, some vaguely sensible people seem to think it's not blindingly obvious, and then you remember that they were Boris Johnson fanboys and Brexit supporters, so their claims to being vaguely sensible are pretty slim these days.
Well, yeah, I'm going to surprise myself quite a lot here, but I think something Boris himself said does carry a little bit of weight with me.
Go on.
And that, because I think in his response to the inquiry, Boris said that the principle of sharing detailed communications between staff could erode the machinery of government and then may prevent future governments being frank and being able to communicate in an efficient way.
Okay, yes.
I think that holds a tiny little bit of weight. I can see that this might be a dangerous principle, but you
have to at least war game, potentially. 2020 hindsight is a wonderful thing. So a conversation we had in January of last year, subsequent events might have given it a very different flavour to the one it would have now. But you can make that point, and the inquiry will understand the importance of context. It's not like Matt Hancock just handing everything over to a notoriously untrustworthy so-called journalist, is it?
Yeah. And that's exactly the point, isn't it? So I don't think. I think that counter argument does hold a tiny little bit of weight for me. Not sufficient to mean they shouldn't release this information to the inquiry.
What do you think might be in it? What do you think might be in it? And I would urge a modicum of responsibility here, but with Boris Johnson, as Paul suggested, there's no bounds to what he may have been doing, and what, of course, his colleagues were going along with. That might be what they're terrified of, the fact that it will be proof they stayed silent while he did some of his worst.
I think that's it. I think I'm not sure there's going to be any huge revelations or any smoking guns in there, but I think there might be some language that a lot of people have used, or some attitudes that come through in this messaging for people who are in the cabinet at the moment that might be quite uncomfortable and be quite damaging.
I think there'd be something big to go to this. I mean, they're risking a criminal offence if they don't hand it over until 4 p.m. So I'm going to disagree with you there. And we may never know, of course, that's the whole point of this story. I think there might be something, or several things in there that are deeply, deeply damning for many people. Otherwise, why the fuss?
Well, James, we've got a government who are willing to break the law in a specific and measured way, haven't we?
Limited.
So I'm not particularly limited, thank you. I'm not particularly surprised that they're willing to.
No, well, that's the point, isn't it? And I wonder how it plays. That's why the footballification thing is important to me today. How does it play to people that have gone along with all of it, that were still waving their little Boris Johnson flags up and possibly still are? Why do you think he wants to keep it all quiet? 0345 606 0973. I was writing this weekend about Murdoch, and I hadn't realised the significance of a meeting at Chequers in 1981 when he was trying to buy the Times. And that meeting was denied until the Margaret Thatcher archives came out in 2012. Only then did it emerge that there had been a meeting at Chequers 3 weeks before he was given permission to buy the Times and the Sunday Times without it being referred to the Monopolies and Mergers Commission, which many people argued should have happened. But it was denied for 30 or 40 years. Well, I don't need to say 30 or 40, between 1981 and 2012. So 30 years, give or take. And even at the Leveson inquiry, Murdoch was claiming that he couldn't remember it. So he couldn't remember the meeting, which was unfortunate because the archive also published his thank you letter that was sent to her 10 days later. Handwritten. Maybe he goes to Chequers so often that he can't keep track of all the invitations he gets from British Prime Ministers. But that just popped into my mind talking to James. What are they so scared of? What is it that they don't want to come to light? Ashley's in Tavistock. Ashley, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. To me, as a point of principle here, we mustn't forget all of these people, Johnson, Sunak, and all of them are public servants.
Yes.
If they're using WhatsApp for any business purpose, then that's got to be made available for any subsequent inquiry.
Because we pay their wages, you mean?
Absolutely.
Yes.
But also, when I was in the civil service, we had, in later years and for a number of years, we had, of course, internal secure email. So you could very easily send messages, including a lot of detail, facts and attachments, quite securely by email. But that was open immediately to interrogation if anything incorrect happened. The same has to apply for WhatsApp. And
so you think they might have been using it?
Use WhatsApp.
Sorry, they might have been using WhatsApp as some sort of back channel.
Well, I mean, if it's just back chat, it's irrelevant.
No, back channel.
Johnson. Oh, sorry, back channel. Apologies.
I read a lot of espionage thrillers, actually.
You and me both. Well, that's my deep concern. Why use WhatsApp? Because to me, that's off the grid.
Let's use WhatsApp for the stuff that we don't want the public ever to know about.
Absolutely.
Which becomes an even bigger reason why we should have a bloody look at it.
Yes. So you can type just as quickly an email as you can on WhatsApp. You can set up your own email groups. There's no reason to use WhatsApp unless you wanted something totally separate for secure communications. You're now desperate that the public who pay your wages don't find out about.
And of course, he lost his phone, supposedly. And therefore couldn't recall the WhatsApp messages that he was exchanging with Lord Brownlow about the funding of his interior decorations
He's been incredibly unlucky. There is a second point here I'd like to make, which is also about...
Almost as unlucky as Rebecca Vardy's lawyer, whose PR advisor. PR advisor, whose phone fell into the North Sea, I believe, at a crucial time during that investigation.
Yes, well, we
a lot of it
about... at the time, but never mind. There's another point as well, James, which is not just this very important point, but there's also how long these investigations and inquiries take now. Because there's every chance this will come out post the next election, and I think members of the public need to know about these very important facts about COVID and how the government was handling or mishandling the whole thing before the next election, because you've got some current players in play.
Yeah, I have faith in Baroness Hallett, actually. I mean, not least because she has been so robust already in this field. And I think
she's been very robust, but my point is, if it gets dragged out much longer, I'm not sure it'll even come out before the next election.
No, of course you're right, because I'm saying that we're not accusing her of dragging her feet, no. But of course if it goes to court, which is perfectly possible, it could end up in court if the Cabinet Office if the government refused to hand over Boris Johnson's unredacted WhatsApp messages and diary entries, it could go to court, and that of course will delay the inquiry, which is due to start in 2 weeks. So what do you think is in them? 0345 6060 973. Let's zone in now on the unredacted WhatsApp messages and diary entries written by Boris Johnson, and presumably the replies as well from key advisors and members of his government. What is in them that he is so desperate that you don't see? Yes, you. What does he want to keep away from you? 0345 6060 973. 10:33 is the time. Chris Bryant makes a valid point. He says one reason the COVID inquiry must get the material it requests is that whereas there would have been a paper trail for all decisions and discussions 20, 50 or 150 years ago, all we have today are the ephemera of texts and WhatsApp messages. We can't let technology erase the historical record. And that speaks to Matt's point in a text as well. If this tells us anything, it's that we need a UK version of the Presidential Records Act, which would make it mandatory to keep and archive all prime ministerial work-related communications. I mean, it's a little more flippant, but not necessarily less serious. This text, James, we may see confirmation as to why the first lockdown was delayed for a week. A baby shower at Chequers, perhaps. I mean, that's what I mean. What could be in there that they're so terrified of seeing the light of day? We haven't really come up with anything yet. Focusing on the principles rather than the possible practices. But tell me this, and I mean it, give me a reason why it shouldn't be published. Because at the moment I'm not getting any, except some... Well, I mean, nothing even in Idiot's Corner, actually. What would it be? Witch hunt? Stitch up? The thing about the witch hunt argument is that it overlooks the possibility that witches might exist in this context. And if Boris Johnson is not guilty of everything he's ever been accused of, then I'm a banana, an EU-regulated, non-bendy banana. So witch hunt is so pathetic as an argument, but there must be valid arguments as to why you can't see. Why? I mean, maybe if I phrase it like this, it'll help. Why don't you think you should be allowed to see these messages? 0345 6060 973. If I phrase it like that, I wonder whether your flimsy support for shrill rhetoric about witch hunts and privacy falls apart. What is it about this tragedy, this national catastrophe, that leaves you convinced you shouldn't see what the actual Prime Minister was doing and saying about it to his colleagues at the time? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. Stella is in High Peak in Derbyshire. Stella, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I found up actually that the gentleman before me has said virtually all that I wanted to say, but in relation to what I think's in the messages, parties, reasons for delays, the fact that they held us in contempt. I mean, he basically said that. I can't remember which morning TV programme it was, where he said, "Let it rip through the."
I think it was the one that
we'll take it on the chin. Or I can't remember.
I think it was the one that's been in the news quite a lot lately. I could be wrong, but
well, yeah, I did wonder if it was that one.
I think it was, but yeah, you're right. He did say that,
and I think also to go back to what Sadiq Khan was saying. I think to you, wasn't it?
Yeah, probably.
But about the fact that he was. If you were a Martian landing, you'd have thought Dominic Cummings was the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
And Boris
that's
Johnson
very
wasn't.
true.
And I do remember, I mean, not that we can trust everything that Dominic Cummings says, but I do recall an excerpt in one of his blogs where he said something like Boris Johnson didn't understand that there would be a barrier in the Irish Sea with the Brexit negotiations and so
there could be all sorts
going on
in
at
there.
The same time. So yeah,
have you got anything positive? I mean, parties, delays, incompetence, callousness, and then concrete proof that they knew they were lying when they said stuff in public that they were clearly contradicting in private.
Exactly. And I just think, and I think this is a worrying. I do recall my MP. I have a Tory MP, and they used their own private email.
Okay.
And there was a great big thing. It was a while ago.
PPE stuff. We haven't mentioned PPE stuff either.
No, we haven't mentioned PPE stuff.
PPE
we haven't mentioned
parties,
all the loans, all the facilities, or the facilitated loans, or the facilitated VIP lanes.
Because the thing about Johnson,
going to have a field day.
I think this is good. I think you've been the most helpful caller so far. Typical woman, if you'd allow me to say that, being all self-deprecating at the beginning, saying that all your points had already been made. It's weird how men never do that on this programme. Least of all the bloody presenter. Honestly, he could do with a little bit of that modesty that you displayed. But of course, I mean, what you've got to remember, the lens through which you must examine all of this, is Boris Johnson's integrity or lack thereof. How plausible is it that he would have told epic lies in public that are proven to be lies by his private communications with colleagues? I'm biased insofar as I know what he is and have been saying so for some time, but I have all the evidence to back it up. And my answer to that question would be incredibly plausible, unbelievably plausible, completely plausible. The man would tell you it was raining, even as you were getting sunstroke.
It reminds me of, I follow a guy on Instagram, and he's an American senator. And he talks about the mega dot.
Yeah.
And he said, when the cameras are on, it's a different story to when the cameras are off. And I honestly think that that's where, not that they were that far, although I do wonder.
Sure.
However, what he was saying in public to what he was saying in private, I think what he was saying in public, wash hands, all that kind of thing. I mean, he did let the cat out the bag when he very first said, I went round and shook hands with everybody.
Yeah, it's just odd, wasn't it? Just so odd, now, all of it.
I just think that and I think that's why they had all the parties at Downing Street, because they genuinely didn't believe COVID existed.
No, that
And
they did. I'm interrupting you again because I think I know what happened. I think it was Lucy Easthope that explained this to me on Full Disclosure.
Right. I haven't listened to her yet.
Well, there you go. I need a note off your mum by the end of break today to explain why, please. But I don't do this for my own amusement. But the measures they brought in belatedly had worked, and they knew that, and they knew that protecting the vulnerable and slowing the spread had been successful. Therefore, they relaxed in Downing Street while they weren't telling the rest of because they couldn't tell everybody to relax, but they just thought they were special with some justification, objectively, some justification. I disagree with what they did, but it wasn't. They knew it existed and they knew it was a danger, but they thought that they had dealt with it sufficiently to start throwing parties and wheeling suitcases full of booze into Downing Street, which is a helpful analysis of what went on, because the alternatives are too bleak to contemplate. Stella, lovely stuff. That's a list now. So you've got the PPE deals. Carol Vorderman, pretty much the only person in the country who's still worrying away at that particular issue. God, thank goodness. It was brilliant on Have I Got News For You. Another recent guest on Full Disclosure, actually. I was in for a penny, in for a pound. The parties, almost definitely some exchanges on there about the parties. The reasons for the delay in lockdown, the first one, a week late, estimated to have caused 20 to 30,000 deaths. Just abject incompetence, things that you wouldn't want your WhatsApp to be revealed for, like not understanding. You remember Nadine Dorries asking colleagues what the customs union was? Because whenever she explained why she was adamant we had to leave it, she kept losing arguments. So she'd already decided we had to leave it before she actually knew what it was. Those kind of WhatsApp messages. She's still desperately upset about the fact that they were made public. And then, of course, perhaps most significantly, the proof of lying, because that makes all of them complicit with Johnson. Collective cabinet responsibility kind of died a death a few years ago. But Johnson saying in public, this is good and we must do this and we must do that. And then in private, he's behaving in a completely irresponsible fashion, saying the polar opposite of things he was saying publicly. And everybody involved in those WhatsApp exchanges suddenly becomes complicit in that particular form of corruption. So that's 1, 2, 3. That's only 5 things on the list, and it's 10:42. What else can we put on it? I'm afraid at the moment I've got nothing in the other column, which means either there's nothing to put there once you get rid of people like Nadine Dorries bleating meaninglessly about witch hunts, or I haven't persuaded you that my quest is sincere. I would love to see sensible and intelligent arguments as to why you shouldn't see Boris Johnson's WhatsApp messages and diary entries during the COVID crisis. Nicola is in Kingston. Nicola, what would you like to say?
I think the Boris Johnson, and can we stop calling him Boris?
We don't on this
His
programme.
name is Alexander.
We don't. Well, no, you've got to call him Boris Johnson. If you come on the show and start talking about Alex Johnson, no one's going to know what you're talking about. But we should always insert his surname to avoid the Madonnification of the man. So why do you think they don't want this stuff to see the light of day?
I don't think he would know the truth if it came and bit him on the bum.
Nor do I.
I think he's so far deep in all his lies that he just does it as, the rest of us do oxygen.
So why would the government protect him now that he's no longer in it and in many ways keeps causing trouble for it?
Because it's not just him, it's half the government. They're all in it. Look at Jacob Rees-Mogg. I mean... Must I? No, don't.
No, thank you.
It's just nonsense. And they need to go, all of them.
Is there nothing to put in the other column? Like, if ministers know that their WhatsApp messages could be made public at some point later, they may somehow become less effective ministers. They may not say uncomfortable things that need to be said. I'm reaching a bit.
They used to be decent Tories, and I'm not a Tory. But they used to be decent Tories. There aren't now, that I can see. Doris, really?
No. Well, she's not in government. Just that question of, for the future, the precedent that's set, the idea that if there's another crisis and people are making fairly outlandish suggestions because they're desperate, they're not, and it might turn out to be a good idea, but they're not going to make the suggestion anymore because one day it might end. I don't buy it myself, but I'd like someone to have a crack at making it in good faith and seriously. It is coming up to 10:45. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. 24 notebooks with contemporaneous notes. Did you see him at the weekend? I keep forgetting what day it is. I don't think I've played it out, have I? When he got collared at the airport by a rather brilliant Sky News reporter. And amazingly, he forgot the cameras were there. So before he went and spoke to the journalist, he ruffled his hair. He actually did the hair ruffle that I've been pointing out to you for the best part of 20 years, it sometimes seems. The hair ruffle and the fake sort of, and then halfway through the interview, desperate to be like, no, you said this, no, that desperation to be like, even now, with his feet so close to the fire, his toenails are melting, even now he can't stop the old shtick. The shtick which was, of course, first picked up by his housemaster at Eton, who wrote that he somehow expects to be excused. He thinks it's churlish of us to expect him to abide by the system or the measures that bind the rest of society together, or words to that effect. What could be in it that they, not just he, but they are so scared of that they're prepared to risk a court case to stop not you from seeing it necessarily, but the actual inquiry into the COVID response? 0345 6060973. 10:49 is the time. I'm sort of wondering what lies are likely to be exposed about by Boris Johnson. This desperation to avoid the public. I'm going to put Mike in Swindon in Idiot's Corner. Mike writes, "You still talking about Boris? It's such a yesterday topic." That's a level of stupidity on display there, Mike, that I find performative and also close to unbelievable. I mean, if it was even vaguely funny, I'd think it was some sort of parody. But at 4:00 today, the deadline expires for the government to hand over the WhatsApp messages and diaries of the man who was in charge of the government's response to the largest and most lethal crisis this country has ever faced in peacetime. If you think that's yesterday's story, then I'm afraid you are. Well, Idiot's Corner seems too generous. It seems too polite. It seems too kind. Anyway, you're in Idiot's Corner, and here's a good one. Wow. A conspiracy corner today. Stop banging on about Partygate and discuss the WHO pandemic treaty, which will have us locked down forever. Right you are. Honestly, these people are allowed near scissors. Henry Riley has marched into the studio like a dog with a bone. Is there news afoot, Henry?
There is news. Of course, the 4 p.m. deadline we were waiting for today, James, for those unredacted WhatsApps, diary entries from the former Prime Minister Boris Johnson, has been extended. But there is more to that. So they requested an extension to the 5th of June. This request came in from the Cabinet Office. That was rejected by the inquiry, but it has now been extended until Thursday. That is the 1st of June, 4 p.m. again. So it's been extended by 2 days. The reason with the inquiry and Baroness Hallett have been told that actually the Cabinet Office doesn't have the material. So they can't meet today's deadline because Boris Johnson has not yet handed over those WhatsApp messages or the diary entries from Mr. Johnson's notebook.
I thought the police had the diaries.
Yes, but the Cabinet Office claim they don't have it at the moment.
But they don't claim. Are they saying Johnson's got them, or are they just saying that they don't have them?
They're saying they don't have it in their possession at the moment.
But that's because the police have got it.
Yes.
Yes. Not because Johnson's not handed it over yet.
No, but it's not in a sort of a form to hand over. So it's a real diary.
That's the point.
It is a
they could have bloody photocopied it, Henry, couldn't they?
More than one copy.
Sheesh. So, well, I know the police have got the diaries because that's why Johnson was having kittens this weekend. And the WhatsApp messages have been handed over to his own lawyers, and his lawyers then handed them to the police, but no one's actually given them to the Cabinet Office yet.
That's right.
Does that sound right?
That is what appears to have happened, hence the extension.
The plot thickens, doesn't it? But no sign of softening from Baroness Hallett then on the question of redactions.
No, and, Baroness Hallett, of course, referencing as well that it could indeed be criminal if the government, if the Cabinet Office do not hand this over. She is very much sticking to her guns. What was interesting, James, is we had brief throughout the day, didn't we, that they were not backing down the government. The government were going to hold firm. These particular messages, in their words, were private. They were irrelevant to the COVID inquiry. Are we starting to see perhaps a slight softening of that?
And forgive me for this, because I don't know the answer to it, which means there's no reason why you should. But would it all come out, or would it only be stuff that Baroness Hallett and her colleagues are judged to be relevant to their inquiry that would subsequently be published. If they were complaining about Jacob Rees-Mogg eating all the prawn crackers at last night's, actually, if it was an illegal party, that would be relevant, wouldn't it? But if they were complaining about Jacob Rees-Mogg eating all the prawn crackers at a gathering where everyone did remain 2 metres apart, that wouldn't be published. Do we know, or is it a bit like handing over your WhatsApp messages to Isabel Oakeshott? Does it all end up out there?
So my understanding is, speaking with allies of Boris Johnson, they're worried that actually what you referenced, James, could happen, that actually we could have a series of irrelevant, as they would see it, WhatsApp messages published.
Obviously damaging, otherwise they wouldn't be resisting the publication.
Well, quite. And I was listening to Lord Faulkner speaking earlier this morning, and he was saying that actually it's important to have what Boris Johnson allies may judge as irrelevant messages, because it's important to see what the priorities were. Of course, in 2020, when the pandemic first started, Brexit, as you know, was a key issue. How much time was Boris Johnson spending on Brexit in relation to the COVID inquiry? That, I'm told, is the main area of perhaps... Are
you? OK, and how conscious was he, of course, of the fact that the deal he was describing as oven-ready was going to fall apart the minute that it met reality, the minute that it was exposed to the cold light of day, something that Dominic Cummings has hinted at, Boris Johnson knowing all along, even as he used it to... persuade the country. OK, thank you. It gets curiouser and curiouser. Have we got the airport encounter? What's the name of the Sky journalist who collared him at the airport on Saturday? Matthews. He's absolutely brilliant. Have a listen to this. Here you go, Riley. Listen to this. Watch and learn.
You have form in terms of breaking the law on COVID. Have you broken it again?
No, and I've been here to talk about Ukraine. That's what I've been doing. And
why wouldn't you talk about COVID? You're being accused of breaking the law at Chequers and at Downing Street, did you?
No, but look.
If it's proved that you did, are you finished as a politician?
The answer is that, as I said before, there was absolutely no rule breaking, and
What proof do you have of that?
Well, look, those who want to make allegations should make allegations, and so far nobody has. And you want my honest view, I think this whole thing is completely nonsensical. And look, I've got to check in for a flight now.
That's only a little snippet. I might use that as an aperitif and play you the longer version shortly. But the question remains, what are they so worried about? And we're adding Brexit to the list, thanks to Henry Riley. You know how this programme works. We hardly ever like to mention Brexit because it's all water under the bridge now, and you lost, get over it. But Brexit, so possibly there are exchanges here that demonstrate Johnson was lying about Brexit to the public while privately acknowledging things that some people already knew to be true. Let's go to Plymouth. Loz is there. Loz, what would you like to say? Henry, great stuff. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Good morning, James.
Hello, Loz.
They know how serious this is, and it is serious. There's two points I want to make here, James.
Go on.
The first is, I think, if the WhatsApp messages are revealed, it'll show the absolute contempt that they hold us in, Johnson and his acolytes, and also it will reveal yet more evidence of industrial-scale lying.
Normally, Loz, I like to give you a prize for the quality of your contributions to the programme, but on this occasion, I think you're flirting with the stating of the bleeding obvious, aren't you? I can't see what else there would be. What else would they be worried about? Well,
this is it. I think it'll bring them all down, James, because I honestly think because there'll be so much badness within the messages, I don't think they'll be able to survive it.
So it's not just Johnson who would be hold below the waterline. You think that the Conservative Party in its current itiration, and indeed the Tory government would be toast, albeit not immediately, because as earlier callers reminded us, I think in Tiverton, the wheels of justice, if that's what we're going to call it, will turn very, very slowly.
James, I mean, you go back to what you just said. I'm stating the blooming obvious, but it's all we can state because the obvious is the obvious for these people.
I think you're right when you've eliminated the impossible, which would be that there are some sensitive exchanges that would actually be damaging to the protections of privacy. We've got Brexit, we've got PPE contracts, we've got parties, we've got delays, unnecessary delays, we've got incompetence, and we've got proof of lying. That's quite a sextet, isn't it?
I've just said on Twitter, James, We've never been governed so badly within the modern era by reprobates and the worst of the worst of the worst.
You can't come on here and start bigging up your Twitter account, Loz. What do you think? Honestly, what do you flipping at? It cost you thousands. I'll put you through. Put Loz through to the advertising department. I think he's found the wrong number, Loz. You take care, mate. I love your Twitter account. 10:58. Chris is in March. Chris, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Big fan.
Thank you.
But I want to bring in. Listen, I'm sort of listening to it every day, and I watch PMQs relentlessly. I have done religiously for a long while now. Every single week, Starmer, during the COVID crisis, asked a question of Johnson that he left open, basically. He asked him almost to answer a question and almost get him to reiterate his answer and confirm his answer. Now, no parties didn't go to this. I should just give James Matthews a shout out, the Sky News reporter who did such a brilliant job. So brilliant, in fact, I might play you the full version shortly. But yeah, go on, back to Starmer. So he's over the last sort of 2 or 3 years, he's almost played the long game with Johnson and the subsequent Tory PMs. He's lined them up. And what's going to happen is if his WhatsApps come out and everything that they've denied at the box or everything that's not in public becomes true.
And that's contempt. That's not just embarrassment. That's contempt of Parliament again.
But also as well, if they stand up again in the election in 18 months' time and say, we will do this, Starmer can say, well, hang on, you've literally been proven lying now for the last 4 years. Why would anybody trust any of you? You're all complicit. And it's almost, like I say, the Lars had a really good point. It could ultimately bring about, a complete demise in support for the Conservative Party.
Is there a precedent for that? Can you think of something so awful that it destroyed a party for a generation?
I'm not off the top of my head. You could say Brexit might bring about the end of the Tory Party handing the COVID, but ultimately I just think what you've got is you've got a group of people now who scandalous conduct. Potentially. It would be, who don't even like each other very much, but they're all tied in. If I'm going down, you're coming with me. So if we stand firm, push it away, hide, pretend it never happened, we all have done the chance to come out with it. But unfortunately, with Starmer, he's resolute, he's forensic, and he is lining these people up ready because he knows this is coming. He knew this day would come. He knew the information was there.
Most obviously with the parties when he pushed Johnson through clever. You're right, through clever questioning. Not exciting at the time, but leaving Johnson with nowhere to go but to make a public denial in. He still may, get off from the select committee inquiry.
You've got Yvette Cooper as well. Yvette Cooper absolutely, ties these individuals down across the dispatch box about PPE, about decisions made. Questions around then whether decisions are spending areas.
So many areas where this could be embarrassing.
If you unravel one and you unpick one and prove it to be a policy choice or a decision made rather than a reaction to something, then they can never stand there and say, this is something we can't control. It's the Ukraine war. This is a policy choice because we have seen decisions you are making behind the doors, and they can't ever everything unravels. Brexit.
Yeah. So the real question underpinning all of this is how likely do you think it is that Boris Johnson has told huge lies publicly, to which even his biggest fans are going to have to respond by saying, well, pretty likely. What was it Gitto Harry saying to Emily Maitlis the other day, that he only got sort of a reputation for lying after Brexit, which was just nonsense. He got fired from the Times for making up quotes from his own godfather. He got fired by Michael Howard. I can't remember whether it was for lying about an affair or something. The man is just, you cannot sit here. No one can say Boris Johnson's not a massive liar. And this might just provide more. When I was a kid, Chris, one of my jobs, I would say on the farm, but that would give a slightly incorrect image of my childhood. I grew up on a farm, but we didn't farm it, obviously. But one of my jobs on the farm was to get rid of the rats that the cats had caught and left in the courtyard as a little trophy. And there was one occasion when I got the shovel to scoop up the rat and go and throw it in the hedge. And when I flipped it over, it was full of maggots. It was one of the most unpleasant experiences of my life. I screamed like Violet Elizabeth Bott. And that's what we're talking about here. We know we've got a rat, but what these releases would do is turn the rat over. A rat is disgusting enough as it is, but a rat upon which 400 maggots are feasting is a whole new level of disgusting. Keith's pointing at his clock, Chris, so I shall leave you with that image. It's 6 minutes after 11. Ryan writes, I don't know how long James has been working on LBC. 54 years. Ryan, man and boy. I don't know how long James has been working on LBC. I think I've got an anniversary in January, actually. But anyway, surely when he started, there never would have been a debate about professional messages being sent over social media by the government. all of which shows the ridiculousness of the situation. I'm a teacher, and although we might make unprofessional comments about students, I would never be stupid enough to send them to colleagues using work accounts, never mind social media. However, I think the only argument against James's point is that we are in a position as a country to sacrifice, are we in a position as a country to sacrifice the politicians currently in government to prove this point? I'm happy to lose them, but are we willing to cause even more chaos at a time of obvious difficulty? Yes, is the short answer to that. If it meant a general election, I think it would be well worth it. Also, consequences. Actions must have consequences. And trying to keep it quiet. It gets better, this conversation. I wonder if I asked the wrong question at the top of the 10. I should have just gone in a little bit more obviously on the rights and the wrongs of this. But so far, I've got 6 things on the list of what have they got to hide, and I've got nothing on the why shouldn't they be handed over to the COVID inquiry. I've actually got nothing. I've written privacy. No one's actually rung in to make that point, probably because they realised that I'd asked them what it means and they wouldn't know. So a politician can go on the BBC and talk about privacy, securing the knowledge that they won't get any difficult follow-up questions unless they're in front of well, there's plenty of people that would have follow-up questions, but none of them present a big show on Sunday mornings. And apart from that, what have you got? What is it? Where is it? A light bulb moment over here. We all slagged off Keir Starmer for being dull and forensic, but all along has the ex-director of public prosecutions been steadily putting Boris up on offer. Was pointed out at the time. Our political editor, our former political editor, Theo Usherwood, pointed out on a number of occasions that Starmer seemed to be pushing Johnson into positions where he had to say stuff or he had to withdraw. The parties being the most obvious example, albeit that the select committee investigation into whether or not he's committed contempt of Parliament will look at whether he knowingly misled Parliament. Knowingly could end up being a pinhead upon which Boris Johnson dances, claiming, of course, as he's already claimed, that he went to a party without realising it was a party. If the committee decide to believe that he attended a party without realising it was a party, or a birthday celebration without realising it was a birthday celebration, despite the presence of cake, his wife and an interior decorator, then he didn't mislead Parliament deliberately, knowingly being the key word there. I'm staying with this for a little bit longer because it's really interesting. With the glorious exception of Mike in Swindon, who's currently residing in Idiot's Corner, like Steve McQueen in The Cooler in The Great Escape, but nowhere near as cool. It's a big story. It just got bigger with that delay. It means Baroness Hallett's not backing down, and it looks like the government are beginning to wobble a bit. What have they got to hide? 0345 6060 973. Anthony's in Bletchley Park. What do you think, Anthony?
Well, James, good morning. I reckon if there were rule breaking on an industrial scale, which I think is a pretty obvious reason why they're trying to hide the evidence, not only is it going to highlight the utter hypocrisy of those involved, it's going to prove the contempt they have for us, but secondly, at a sort of tactical level, it's going to undermine and, I reckon, unravel the Tory attack line that the Sue Gray report was tainted by anti-Boris bias. Yes. And this is going to give Labour a fantastic attack line, both in PMQs and while out on the stump, because they can turn around and very simply say, look at the sheer scale of the damage these people have done to you. This is damage they did not want to be ventilated in public. This is what they wanted to conceal. The Tory party is brilliant at saying, this is what the people want. They want to stop the boats. They want to lower inflation. All this nonsense. But
they want you to move on. Move on from Partygate. Move on from Brexit. Move on from all the messes that we've made and focus instead on, I don't know, can women have a penis and Keir Starmer's curry?
And instead of looking like people who should be banged up in coal bits for 6 years, they're going to be shown to be serial law rule breakers. And all the time they're going to be telling us what to think of what we should be doing and why we're not allowed to protest, why we can't do this, why we can't do that, and taking back control. And all the time, the biggest rule breakers, the biggest law breakers, the most
being the people making them.
People.
Well, I mean, the weird bit...
Yeah, they refuse to obey the damn thing.
The weird bit about your analysis is we already know that they were serial rule breakers. I think it was 84 people or over 100 notices, including, of course, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer. So I don't know that anyone can at this point in proceedings argue that they're trying to keep secret stuff that's even worse than the stuff we already know. Because if it's not worse than the stuff we already know, you can price it in, can't you? So it must be worse than what we already know. And what we already know, with the reference to the parties, it may prove to be none of these things. It may all be about Brexit. You know, eventually everything's going to be all about Brexit. And even I'm not looking forward to that day, but it may be proof that he was either too distracted by trying to somehow the oven-ready deal wasn't oven-ready after all, but he could never say so publicly, or he was trying to deal. Dominic Cummings was teaching him about the importance of Northern Ireland and the fact that he lied when he promised that there'd be no border checks. It could be anything, but if it's linked to parties, the fear has to be that it's even worse than we already know and Sue Gray discovered, and the Met, of course.
And that speaks to your point. If they priced in the scale that 84 people have already received notices for breaking the law, what happens if it's actually 250 people in those WhatsApp messages, and there's some gigantic off-site party that they held and called it some kind of political conference?
Let's not get carried away. They weren't having a massive rave in the Delamere Forest. Transit van pulls up, throws open the back doors, and there's a massive, great speakers in there, and everyone starts giving it large. You never know, I grant you, Anthony, but I don't think that we're quite looking at that. The number, it wasn't 84 people, it was 126 fines issued to 53 issued to men and 73 to women, but I don't know that we ever fully broke down whether some people got more than one fine. But the reason Anthony raises Sue Gray is really interesting. Again, if you're interested in not being lied to or evidence of how they lied to you, then stay tuned. If you like being lied to, then I don't know why you do this to yourself every day. I really don't. Is it a masochistic streak? So the Mail will be pretending that Sue Gray was somehow biased, and despite the fact that they called the report a damp squib, I think on their own front page, it suits their purposes because the editor-in-chief, Paul Dacre, remains desperate for a peerage, and the only person who's ever going to give him one is Boris Johnson, no matter how devalued and denuded the entire honours system has become after he, for example, put the son of a former KGB agent in the House of Lords against the advice of the Appointments Committee. The Mail will try to turn the Sue Gray report into something biased, even though they called it a damp squib. What it looks like now is that she really just nibbled at the edges. She did as little as she could get away with. She didn't look at parties in the flat. There's a famous Abbot party that Carrie Johnson is alleged to have thrown right in the thick of it, right in the middle of it. That didn't even get looked at by Sue Gray. She took the parameters of her inquiry and didn't push them at all, which is good civil service practice. You do exactly what it says on the tin. No less and certainly no more. But what these diaries and WhatsApp messages apparently reveal, which is why they've been referred to the police, is that we still don't know the full details of the festivities that went on at Chequers, most pertinently, and at Downing Street. So the idea that Sue Gray, because she subsequently elected to take a job with Keir Starmer, must have been trying to stitch Boris Johnson up during the investigation she did into Downing Street parties, has been rendered beyond ridiculous. It was already ridiculous because the people claiming it was a stitch-up were claiming 5 minutes previously it was a damp squib, but it's now being rendered so completely beyond ridiculous that the only people still clinging to it will be Daily Mail columnists and GBB's presenters. Just bear that in mind if you have the misfortune of stumbling across any of them. Anybody claiming Sue Gray was biased is by definition a season ticket holder in Idiot's Corner. Here is James Matthews, the Sky News correspondent in America, just doing what, frankly, if we'd all done this, and some of us tried, of course, but we were banned from ever talking to him again while he was still Mayor of London. Imagine if he came in to take calls on this show and he got treated like this. Imagine what a better place the country would be in now.
This whole thing is a load of nonsense from beginning to end, and we've made that clear in the statements that I've issued. I think that it's ridiculous that elements in my diary should be cherry-picked and handed over to the police, to the Privileges Committee, without even anybody having the basic common sense to ask me what these entries referred to.
What do they refer to?
There is absolutely nothing in those entries that constitutes rule breaking during COVID restrictions, okay?
Mingling with friends at Checkers.
No,
when you shouldn't have been.
No, that is absolutely not what those diary entries show. That is not what those diary entries show, and the whole thing is totally nonsensical.
Who is trying to stitch you up, Mr. Johnson? Who do you think is trying to stitch you up?
You may well ask.
Who do you think is trying to stitch you up? Richie Sunak?
It's any. Yeah, I'm just. Let's go.
Who is trying to stitch you up, sir? Is it Richie Sunak?
Look, I think it's totally. Where are you? Come on, where are you?
About impeding us, sir.
Yeah.
I've asked you.
It's okay. It's okay. He's from Sky News. He's entitled to ask me questions, and I'm going to tell you. I just think it's totally nonsensical and bizarre that there are tens of thousands of entries in the Prime Ministerial Diary. I've never seen these things before because I haven't looked through it. None of them constitute a breach of the rules during COVID. And they weren't during lockdown; they were during other periods of the restrictions. None of them constitute a breach of the rules. None of them involve socialising. It is total nonsense, and I find it extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary, that these things are handed over by I don't know quite what authority, the Cabinet Office or whoever, to the Privileges Committee and to the police, without any attempt to establish what these things actually mean or what they refer to, with me. And I can assure you that, and I can assure the public that they're all completely innocent and within the rules. And, you talk about a stitch-up. You
spoken about a stitch-up. You said you're being stitched. You said originally you were being stitched up by whom? Richie Sunak? I mean, there's talk of a skip fire.
For reasons that somebody somewhere thinks it's sensible to do this. I don't.
It is 21 minutes after 11. Go on then. I know that a few of you pointing out that he kind of ruffled his hair before he addressed the journalist, almost forgetting that the cameras were there, and also seemed to take a moment out to organise his lies in his own mind before speaking to the journalist. That's according to Al in Sunderland. But the question that I'd ask you now, I've got a couple of phone lines for you. We'll take it up to past. David and Jules are up next. Does listening to that, does it harden your resolve? Does it stiffen your resolve? Do you now think, no, I really, really want to know? I wasn't quite sure what James was banging on about. Don't say that, because that makes it look like I've done a really bad job for the last hour and 15 minutes. But, you might have been thinking, yeah, don't really mind. What's the big deal? But now you've heard him squirm like that, you've changed your mind, or you've heard him put forward reasons why what the inquiry wants to happen shouldn't happen. You've actually been persuaded that Johnson is a man more sinned against than sinning. I'd love to hear that. 22 after 11. David's in Westminster. David, what would you like to say?
So, James, in a simple paraphrase, the answer to why they shouldn't be released is information security. What I mean by that is it's everything from how people communicate, how they pass the information between them, how they manage it, how they store it, and
no one's suggesting that none of it should be handed over.
No, so my personal view is all of it should be, and I think it would tear the system down. But the reason you wanted someone to make the case, and I think I can.
Only if they meant it, but at least you're here, so I'll take you while I've got you.
Right, so the whole point is I have seen MPs, civil service officials and others not do what they're supposed to do when it comes to communicating properly or securely, storing documents securely, handling them. Suella Braverman had to resign because of using personal email accounts. Other people have been...
And accidentally sending sensitive documents to somebody who wasn't supposed to... But she didn't even want to receive them. She shouldn't have sent them to the person she did want to receive them, but she accidentally sent them to a person who shouldn't have received them. I mean, you're on a bit of a sticky wicket because you're arguing something you don't necessarily... Well, you clearly don't believe in, but can you think of what the worst theoretical example might be? What might be in here that would add to the conviction that it would be the right thing to redact it?
So the answer is just going to be that they don't do what they're supposed to do, and then that applies to everything. And that also applies to all of them. It applies to both sides of the house. It applies to all the smaller parties. And what happens is if you start to pull at that, the thread that it could unravel, if followed fully to every corner, would be that you would find that...
it's not going to wash, though, is it?
The political game of Westminster that they all play, and some more successfully than others, is always managing those risks a bit blasé.
No, I understand. I understand what you're saying. It's so you wouldn't want the doctors wouldn't want you to be eavesdropping upon the way they deal with the stresses of their job by talking insensitively sometimes, perhaps about patients. We've seen what happens when police officers' WhatsApp messages are released that were clearly never intended to go public. So it would be the same argument in all of those cases. And yet, as the police example proves, the public have a right to see those messages because the police are public servants on duty at the time. And that would apply equally to politicians in this context.
So it would, but in the rest of our day jobs, and I find this in my day job, in that people of all levels don't seem to care about doing things properly, and that's something that you can already tell is something that bothers me because I want the processes to be followed because that keeps us all safe. The downside is too many people think good enough is good enough, and when it comes to security of people or places or information, good enough is not good enough. It has to be right. It has to be perfect, because if it's not, you have a breach. And all that does is sit there and wait for someone to find it. It sits there in a bus stop on a rainy window.
I understand. I don't think they have made that argument, but if they did, it would carry a little bit more water than Boris Johnson's complaint that he should be there to explain to them what the entries in his diary actually means. I mean, he'll have an opportunity to do that when he gives evidence. Of course he will, actually. Of course won't he? He'll be sitting there giving evidence in a couple of weeks, and they'll say, what does this entry here mean? When you say, had a good old knees up with, Philip Schofield at Chequers this weekend, and they say, what does that? Well, I just was watching him on television, and very sad I am that he's no longer there. So that guy, he's going to have every opportunity to explain the context of whatever it is he's written in his diaries, isn't he? Thank you, David. Good effort. There's an interesting element to the extension that Baroness Hallett has just granted for compliance with her disclosure order, and she has required a signed statement verified by oath. Whether it's going to be written on parchment or vellum, I do not know. But it must be verified by oath to back up the claim that the Cabinet Office does not have copies of Boris Johnson's WhatsApp or diaries. And they want a detailed chronology. She wants a detailed chronology setting out if it had copies and any correspondence with Mr. Johnson about it. So my suggestion to Henry Riley that there might only be one hard copy of the diaries and that's now been handed over to the police looks like something that the Cabinet Office are going to have to prove, because you'd think they might have photocopied it, possibly, but an oath, a sworn oath. Do you know, as David just alluded to, not that long ago, I'd have balked slightly at the idea of the Cabinet Office needing to swear an oath that it was telling the truth. Now I think they should be forced to do it every day, actually, although, of course, the question of what consequences they would face in the event of their oath turning out to have been broken, we will never know. Quite a lot of you suggesting Johnson sounded proper rattled. He always does when he's facing proper journalism and proper questioning. He just very, 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 very rarely did. Jules is in Lichfield. Probably the last word on this. Jules, what's it going to be?
Good morning.
Hello.
That's quite interesting what you've just said, actually, and I don't understand.
You sound surprised. I often say quite interesting things, Jules.
But why aren't these communications backed up to some sort of secure server? Aren't they a matter of public interest?
You'd have thought so.
Shouldn't this information be accessible to civil servants to do and carry out these sorts of inquiries? Why don't we do that just as a matter of course? It's beyond me that they can have these sorts of private WhatsApp messages like some group of fitness girls, just having a chat in the pub. But I don't know what kind of revelations they will reveal. I don't know if it can get any worse than what we already know. I really don't. The only thing I can think is that there's going to be sensitive information in there about maybe Boris having a one-nighter with Mad Nads or something, and he's trying to keep it away from Carrie.
Mind bleach. Mind bleach, Keith. Bring in the mind bleach, please.
But I mean, what is it going to reveal that we don't already know? Is it just going to shine a bright light on the corruption and the funneling of public money.
Well, the calculation at the moment is that questions and speculations like the ones you have just rather indelicately indulged in, Jules, are preferable to handing over the unredacted. So that is actually a neat conclusion that you've led us to. However bad our imaginations may be, and in your case, that's pretty bad, that is better than the reality. They'd rather have us speculating and keeping it secret than revealing and knowing what was going on. Isn't that interesting?
Is there a whiff of dead cast? Well, the crime and policing bill and that little clause in there. Well, I mean, Philip Schofield's been a great distraction this week for the government.
We may talk about that a little later in the programme, but there's no earthly way that was deliberately planned in order to distract attention from Rishi Sunak's current travails. And this isn't a dead cat. This is a whopping great roaring tiger.
No. Just a whiff of it though, with the Lords rejecting a clause in the crime and policing bill.
Lots of things can go on at the same time, Jules, without one being designed to eclipse the other. I'm increasingly suspicious about dead cat arguments, but they do sometimes exist. Of course they do. We know they do. Steve Bannon put it in unforgettable phraseology about flooding the zone with excrement, and he wasn't talking about British water companies. He was talking about news media in America and Donald Trump's myriad transgressions. But no, this story has come about because of the timing of the inquiry, and the timing of the inquiry was enshrined when Sunak appointed Baroness Hallett to look into it. And obviously that explains the 4 o'clock deadline today, now extended to Thursday, 2 days hence. And look at me, 2 days hence, not 3 days hence, even though a large part of me still thinks it's Monday because I wasn't at work yesterday. It is 11:34, so thanks to Jules there. We have to add sex to the list, don't we? To the list of things that the WhatsApp messages may reveal. I mean, I'm putting it in brackets, but there it is. Let's just put shenanigans. So Brexit stuff, PPE, parties, delays, incompetence, proof of lying, and shenanigans. A couple of others before we move on. Peter in Enfield makes an excellent point. WhatsApp messages would unequivocally indicate genuine state of mind. So the difference, for example, between I didn't realise in public versus can we get away with this in private? I mean, the one conversation I'd love to have witnessed pre-COVID, or not pre-COVID, sorry, but pre-Partygate, was the Barnard Castle one. Love to have been there when Cummings and the lawyers were working out what he could and couldn't say in public. And another suggestion from Paul, that there may just be really unpleasant language. Consider how racist Johnson has been in public, how he has referred to foreigners, including our allies. Goodness knows what he'd be like in private. WhatsApp messages and personal notebooks could be a foreign relations disaster. I mean, yeah, he's not Prime Minister anymore, but you're right, it would be a PR disaster for him and by association for the Conservative Party and or the Conservative government. Thank you for that. I found that really energising, actually. Really interesting. And that little thing that happens very occasionally when the story takes a bit of a turn while we're actually discussing it is always fun, isn't it? And Henry Riley comes scurrying in with his little nuggets of news. And that could be a new feature on the programme, actually, Henry's Nuggets of News. and it turns out that the deadline's been extended and the Cabinet Office is having to swear an oath that they're telling the truth. Of course, is Simon Case's purview, so the rationale behind demanding that they swear an oath telling the truth seems pretty solid in Case's case, to coin a phrase, the case of Case. I want to move on to something completely different now. This story really worried me when it broke at the weekend. And it's going to be one of those ones where I think you need to be in it to talk about it from any angle. For many years now, Metropolitan police officers in particular and police officers in general have been telling me and you about the amount of their time and energy that is taken up dealing with matters that would once have been medical, dealing with mental health matters that would once have been medical. So organisations, institutions, services that would once have stepped in to deal with mental health crises on the part of citizens and civilians are now dealt with by the police. I'm not 100% across what's gone, but I know that these conversations started around 2010 and that austerity looked at an awful lot of things that were, if you like, below the waterline. Let's get rid of that. No one will notice until they need it, and then it won't be there, and it'll be too late to do anything about it. The gully sucker principle, as I occasionally refer to it on this programme. And we know that austerity tried to get rid of an awful lot of stuff that was being paid for from the public purse and was for the benefit of the public. Mental health care seems to me to be a very, very good example of that. I haven't got the numbers and how much of it is down to an increase in diagnosis or an increase in illness as opposed to a decrease in funding and a decrease in care. I don't know. But I do know this. The police spend a remarkable amount of time, and I know this both statistically and anecdotally because you've told me, on air and off air, the police spend a remarkable amount of time talking people down, sometimes literally, of course, but dealing with a mental health situation, dealing with mental health issues. So this weekend it was announced that the Met is to stop attending emergency mental health incidents unless there is an immediate threat to life. Now, I don't know that they have much choice at this stage for the very simple reason that they have stuff to do. They have lots and lots of other stuff to do. And this is taking up too much of their time. And it is, in a sense, it's crime prevention at best, isn't it? It is somebody who is in great distress and therefore may be a danger to themselves or to others, and the police are called to intervene. That might get filed under immediate threat to life. It's going to be a fairly broad description, isn't it? But what kind of incidents are police called to that they shouldn't be called to is the question that seems to be missing and needs to be answered, because no one's allowed to say Ghostbusters at this point. It's a very important question. Who are you going to call? I told you not to say it. Come on, just grow up, will you? Seriously. How old? 11:39 is the time. Who are you going to call? So I think what we need is an example of the sort of incident that they will no longer be called to, and an answer to the question of who will help instead. I want to use the word help rather than attend, because I think it carries a different emotional weight. So police officers, the sort of stuff you get called to, regardless of whether you think you should be or not, what sort of incidents are you as a police officer going to currently that are mental health related, but are not necessarily police business? I just want to get the distinctions. I'm asking a lot of you this hour, and I make no apology. We'll probably give it 45 minutes, actually, because I want to do a much sillier story. Well, not sillier, actually. A very different story later. And we've done an hour and a half on Johnson's latest scandal. The Royal College of Psychiatrists president has called the move unhelpful. A previous Inspector of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue had said that the proposals could create a vacuum. That's what I mean by who will turn up instead. And I tell you what I'm doing, because I nearly said Monday, because it's the first show of the week. I wouldn't do this on a Thursday or a Friday, because I get a bit psychologically tired towards the end of the week as I get older, and the topics that make me go, oh God, that's important, but it's tricky. Sometimes my appetite for talking about them diminishes as the week passes. I hope I don't give in to that often, but I know I do occasionally, especially on a Friday at 12 o'clock. I think to myself, oh, can't we do something fun? But this is really important, and it could be one of those things we look back on and think, how the hell did we let that happen? And why the hell didn't we make some noise about it at the time? So that's the question I've got for you. How bad does... And so you'll be coming at it from the point of view of a mental health professional or someone whose mental health has been poor over time to the point of needing external help, or a parent of someone who needs external help, and then, of course, of the police as well. the police who are called to these incidents. And I'm not here to judge you. Categorically, I'm not here to. I am some days, but not on this issue. If you don't think you should be turning up for that sort of incident, who will? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need, because that's what seems to underpin the alarm at what the Met are doing. It's what Zoe Billingham, the previous Her Majesty's Inspector of Constabulary, has described as the potential creation of a vacuum. It's coming up to 11:45. If you hit the numbers now, you will get through. All right, 0345 6060 973. Jennifer makes a powerful point, but I don't think it's either or. She says, I'm fuming. Why the hell are the police being criticised for this? They aren't mental health out of hours. Why aren't we looking at why the main majority mental health services are 9 to 5, Monday to Friday? It's the system's failings, not the police. If you break a leg at the weekend, you don't ring the police. So why is mental illness any different? Sorry, I'm so angry. Hope you're all okay. Well, I hope you're okay as well, Jennifer. But it's not quite that, because as long as mental health services are 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, the police are the only people you can call. And if you now know they're not going to turn up, well, where does that leave us? Where does that leave people who need help or who need an intervention? People who are frightened about somebody having an episode in their front garden. People who are frightened about their child posing a risk to themselves or to others. Who did we used to call? 0345 6060 973. And who will we call in future when we can't call the police? But I think a good starting point on this, entirely up to you, depends who rings me, but I think a good starting point on this would be how police officers feel about turning up to incidents that are not really police, or maybe you think they are police matters and that Mark Rowley's got this incredibly wrong. It's one of his first big policy pronouncements, isn't it? Apart from revealing that he didn't have the guts to admit there was institutional racism in the Metropolitan Police because he was worried that people wouldn't understand what the words actually meant and didn't think he was capable of explaining. But apart from that, this is one of his biggest policy decisions. He's written to health and social care services in Greater London to inform them that the Met will no longer attend emergency health incidents unless someone's life is at risk. So what do we think about this? What does it mean? And what do you think might happen? 0345 6060 973. 11:48 is the time. The question is pretty straightforward. What's going to happen and what happens now? Jennifer's in Guildford. Jennifer, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, I work in a crisis team in mental health, and we deal with this all the time. And when this came out, we got the article on Sunday, actually.
Yes.
We always sort of saying, this can't happen. They need to speak to the mental health professionals, because I don't know what consultations happen, because we deal with regular incidences, very dangerous instances where the police are needed to be called. It would be very, very concerning to be assessing someone in their own home and feeling that something seriously could go wrong, which it has in the past. I have had a colleague get stabbed in front of 2 police officers, 2 social workers and 2 doctors, and that was meant to be a planned Mental Health Act assessment. So this is where it can go wrong. And go on, sorry.
I'm trying to work out what his thinking is, and what you say about consultation is really interesting. I wonder whether he could claim that he's trying to make clear that something must be done at the health and social care end, as opposed, because 10,000 hours a month, he says, officers are spending on what is principally a health matter. The caveat that if there's an immediate threat to life, the police will still attend, but your sector should be much bigger and much better funded. He might say that's what the government needs to...
There's no law, James. There's no law. If someone has a mental health crisis, and separating mental health from a criminal element is equally wrong.
Yeah.
Because sometimes there is a criminal element to it. There might be someone that's attacking their own relatives. That we have got no powers to enter anyone's home at all. We can't. Yeah, there's no. This is the thing, they don't understand the law. So the law.
You're talking about the Metropolitan Police Commissioner. It's not impossible he doesn't understand the law, but I hope it was unlikely.
What I've heard on your
station,
on your radio station, is sometimes misquoting the Mental Health Act law. It's 24 hours of 136, not 36 hours.
Right.
A place of safety is normally either it's a 136 suite, which is in a psychiatric hospital, or it can be a police station, or it can be A&E if the person needs treatment. So sometimes the delays is if they take them to A&E, the police have, because they're not, so the law is they can't, if they're in A&E General Hospital, they're not under section, you cannot section them in the hospital. You have to arrange for that. So that's sometimes why there's a delay. If someone needs medical treatment, the staff cannot then take over. So sometimes it's misunderstanding the law. Sometimes police will go into a situation in the home where perhaps a mental health person's in crisis and is actually committing a crime through their mental illness, but they will not want to use the 136, which they can't in a home, but they won't want to use any other legal issue.
Here's the question then. Rowley pointed to one case where Met officers spent 30 hours supervising one individual having a crisis because they were unable to find a space in a mental health unit. What happens?
I'd like to know more about that.
No, I know, but what would happen if the Met officers aren't there? That seems to be what's missing from all of the coverage. What do you think would happen? What would happen? I mean, you're stretched. You can't be in two places at once. At the moment,
the people's rights get... if there was no police officers there to, whatever the scenario was in that situation, which caused the delay, I don't know. Sometimes it's getting the social workers, the doctors, everyone together. I still find that hard to believe. Yeah. But whatever the scenario is, if there's no police officers, then you might have a hospital security. They do not have any legal powers. That person's entitled to say, I'm insulted, I'm being held against my will. The law, as it stands, and this is where I don't think the police understand, there's nothing a lay person or a mental health professional can do. The only people that have those legal powers are the police.
What used to happen? You're probably too young to know, but it didn't used to...
I'm not.
It didn't used to be...
1997.
Well, the police didn't used to attend nearly as much as they do now, did they? Or did they?
They still did, if we felt there was a risk, but mental health in itself is complex. It's changed. There's drugs now involved. There's a lot more social family breakdown. There's a lot more, let's just say it's just heightened. It's got far, far worse than it ever did when I first, used to take people to hospital. Things have changed. The complexity has changed. Just the demographics of people have changed. You're going into very risky situations sometimes. People are concealing knives, drugs on the premises, family breakdowns.
So what's going to happen then, without being too apocalyptic? Unless you feel you should be. Deaths.
There'll be deaths of start of a mental health professional, or there'll be deaths. I was in a situation where we went round, me and my colleague. There was 2 children in the property. There was the wife, the grandmother. This gentleman was very, very mentally unwell, very, very agitated, aggression, and we had to get out really quickly. Now, what would we do in that situation if we'd stayed? He ended up stabbing himself in the neck. That's how unwell he was. But what if we tried to intervene? What if we got caught, or the kids got caught in the crossfire? I know they'll say we will attend for life.
Threatening, but you don't know how threatening it is until it happens, do you? And how significant is the reduction in the number of beds in mental hospital?
There's no beds available.
Well, that's the real problem here, then, is it? Ultimately.
Well, yeah. I mean, the idea is that we try to treat people in their homes, and the only people that are in hospital are the severely illest people. So all the beds in London are never available ever. So maybe we need a few more beds.
And maybe this will force the issue, but the worry,
to hospital.
Yeah, the worry for you is what's going to happen while the issue is being forced. Thank you, Jennifer.
Well, they can't. No. They can't because they have right to preserve life. If they don't do that, they're breaking their own police code. And like I said, the police need more mental health law training. They do not understand the nuances and the dilemmas. And I don't think Mr. Rowley does at all.
It looks that way, but there may be people who want to come at it from a different angle. They'll struggle to sound as informed and as concerned as you, for which I'm very grateful, Jennifer. Take care. 11:55 is the time. Crikey. There's a big response to this, actually, and it's not good at the moment. Simon's in Twickenham. Simon, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hello,
just say that last caller was fantastic and really articulated sort of what happened to my brother-in-law, who he unfortunately passed away in 2015 after a acute mental health episode. He was
I'm sorry.
Schizophrenic and was having hallucinations that caused him to attempt to break into someone's house because of what he was
hallucinating.
hearing. Yeah. So the police came, as the owners called them. They were very good initially. They realised what was happening and used the Section 136 powers.
Right.
But there was no beds at all in southwest London, central London. There was one bed up in North London, but they refused to take anyone out of borough.
Right.
So
that's unhelpful, isn't it?
Yes, it was. I'm starting about halfway through the story.
Sure, of course, I understand.
So that's when the police came in. But in terms of mental health provision, he initially went to A&E when he started feeling unwell, and he was there for 14 hours without being seen. And then sort of had a change of heart and took off. So what happened? So the police then kind of not so well doing. They took him to police station, which, as the previous caller said, is a place of safety, which they can take.
Right. Not a cell, but a station, is it? Or I don't know.
No, it'll be a cell.
I've got a couple of people on text telling me they can't do that, but it actually happened to your brother-in-law. So.
It does. It's what they. So there's several places of safety.
Yes.
A police cell is obviously not the first choice. They will go to a mental health hospital.
But it might be the place of last resort.
Exactly. Yeah. If there's no mental health beds available, then yes. So he ended up in a cell for 20 hours, I think.
God.
Problem is, it's not the place for someone with an acute mental health crisis.
No.
He starts injuring himself, so they get taken to A&E, which is St George's in Tooting, which is on the same site as Springfield Hospital, which is the main mental health hospital in South London, which there's still no beds there. So he's
all this time he's in the care of the police. All this time,
still under the care of the police.
Because here's the mad thing: is that both makes Jennifer correct and Mark Rowley correct, doesn't it? In that she's terrified what's going to happen when the police aren't there, and his argument would be this isn't something that the police should be doing.
No, I mean absolutely right. I mean, so what I was initially going to say was there is an out of office psychiatric team for my borough, for Richmond, but if someone is acting aggressively, which is quite common with schizophrenia, especially if it's an acute crisis, is that they just won't attend without, I think, 2 ambulances in presence, just for their own safety and for the safety of the patient, which is
it's I mean, threat to life is a very vague, unnecessarily vague, but a very vague criteria, isn't it? Really?
Yeah.
Oh
so,
boy.
I mean, and you know how ambulances are now. It just means getting 2 ambulances to get to one address is not going to happen.
No.
So it's an absolute minefield. I mean, the police were called because he was breaking into a house.
Yeah, that's not a threat to life necessarily, is it?
No.
It isn't normally. You phone the police and tell them someone's breaking into your house, they don't come.
Yeah, but from the start, he was at A&E. He wasn't at hospital. Wasn't seen.
Oh God.
We did call the out of hours psychiatric team. Wouldn't come without ambulances. So it escalated all the way to the point to where the police were involved. So if there was preventative measures,
then the police wouldn't go. Is there an argument? I appreciate this is still very raw for you and your family, but is there an argument that Mark Rowley is right, but it just feels wrong because of what the police are currently doing?
He's right in essence that it should not be the police's job.
You can't just come along and pull the plug like this on what is currently happening because the alternative is going to be worse.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
And I think you're talking billions of pounds investment in mental health to get it so people like my brother-in-law are seen before he gets to that
you've got
crisis
beds,
situation.
You've got beds, you've got people, you've got interventions, you've got crisis teams that are bigger. And Simon, thank you. I thought this might be one of those stories that did not lend itself to neat analysis, and we were right, weren't we? Thank you. It is 12 noon now. It is 4 minutes after 12. We will continue this conversation about the Metropolitan Police Commissioner's decision to stop sending officers to emergency mental health incidents unless there is what is described as an immediate threat to life for a little longer. And then we're going to turn our attention to the Philip Schofield story. And we're going to ask exactly the same question that we asked a couple of weeks ago, except a couple of weeks ago we had to tiptoe around the claims that he had had some form of relationship with somebody who he had known for a long time, dating back to before that person was of an age where they could have consensual sexual relationships. And I mean, quite how that story became so widely known, I don't actually know. But we couldn't talk about it on air because it had not been confirmed at that point. It has now essentially been confirmed. But the question still remains, albeit that there is something grim, I think, about knowing someone when they were 15 or younger, depending on the detail. But I understand that to be the case in this point. When you are, in your 50s or your 40s, and then when they reach the age of consent, you embark upon some sort of relationship together. I always double check myself on issues involving two members of the same sex or two men in particular. I always say, what would you do if it was a man and a woman? And I'm confident in this case I'd feel exactly the same way. It'd be like someone coming into LBC on work experience at 15. And then when they turn 18, I'd start going out with them. Or I start having a relationship. That would just be gross, I believe, but obviously not illegal. But why is this story so huge, given that the programme is only watched by around 1.5 million people every morning? That's the thing that intrigues me, although it is obviously not as important a question as the one we're currently dealing with. So I shall play it by ear. What's going to happen is a massive worry, and why is he doing this is the bigger question, I think. So the Met Police Federation, Ken Marsh, usually a pretty solid contributor to public discourse, their chairman, says he broadly welcomes the announcement, but officers will still attend most calls because they'll be concerned about the consequences of not responding. So is Rowley politically motivated in a good way? Is he simply pushing the spotlight of this issue into Downing Street? I don't know. I want to know what you think. Andrew's in Doncaster. Andrew, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, the police have dealt with me on 3 occasions. 2 of them led to a section, and I think their powers enabled me to be kept safe at a time when my brain was overloading so much that I couldn't make my own decisions. So on one occasion, I was driving around a roundabout, and traffic police had noticed I'd done that several times.
Right.
So they pulled me over, fearing that I was drunk or maybe helpfully lost, and realised the state I was in and called an ambulance. And so their sharpness of something not being right.
That would still happen. That would still happen under Mark Rowley's proposal, wouldn't it?
I would hope so.
Well, no, it definitely would, because they didn't know that you were having a mental health crisis at the time.
That's right.
So that one would still be okay.
And later there was another incident that they came to, and they were again first responding because of the traffic. The traffic situation sort of thing. Yes. But that was very much early hours of the morning, and, I've been asked not to go into detail around that, but that was around a bridge and so on. And they came and they were able to stop the traffic. But if paramedics arrived straight away, they wouldn't really have those same
No, but that would be a threat
powers.
To health, an immediate threat to life, would it?
Yes. So in my, from my
Did the police look after you well in these situations?
They were absolutely superb.
Good.
They were absolutely superb. And as your caller before the news said, I was kept in a police cell for 17 hours.
As a safe space.
As a safe space. But it is an actual police cell on the wing of their cells.
Yeah.
And that happened to be a Friday night. And you can imagine the chaos in a
because
busy
there was
police
nowhere
station.
else. There was nowhere else for them to take you.
Yeah, totally. So I think my hope is that Mark Rowley's made this announcement in order to stir this discourse.
Yeah, same.
which I think is more important than the Philip Schofield story, actually.
Well, I don't think anyone's going to argue with you about that, Andrew.
This government have turned off public services.
Well, I see what you mean about Schofield. You wouldn't know from the newspapers this weekend that this was a more important story than the Philip Schofield.
No. And when mental health affects a huge number, poor mental health affects a huge number of people, this actually is a massively bigger story than a million viewers of This Morning.
Yes, it is, clearly. But we don't talk about anything for 15 hours a week. Hang on, I just want to pick up a couple of things. Without the threat to life being in place, I think your personal experiences are not oddly in the catchment area of this proposal, because driving repeatedly round a roundabout would attract police attention for in any circumstances, and the other occasion you mentioned did involve an immediate threat to life. The situation seems unsustainable, doesn't it? The hours and indeed the cell space that you took up was not police business, really.
Yes, and it was hugely frightening to me.
I'm sure.
I've never been arrested for a crime and wasn't arrested for a crime at that point.
No, but it felt like it.
It totally did. Totally did.
How are you getting on now?
Really well. That was about
Fantastic.
8 years ago.
Nice.
And that was really well. But the other thing I'd finally like to say is that the three kind of partners in this, the police, health and social care, are both beyond rock bottom in terms of funding.
Yeah.
And if I was a police officer on my own, I live in a rural area, they just can't be there. The police can't be there. The paramedics can't be there. Social workers don't get involved at that stage unless they've been invited by health or the police to make assessments. And so the resources are just rock bottom.
So what's going to happen? I mean, touch wood, in the long term, the situation is addressed holistically. But in the short term, I suspect that Ken Marsh has got it right. And in fact, there might be an instruction going out not to attend, but they still will, because they're worried that bad things will happen if they don't. Yes. I mean, in the long term, the government has to address this, and the private sector has never looked well, I don't think, at mental health. We can look at it in terms of children's homes. We can look at it in terms of care homes, of mental health, private mental health hospitals. There's no money in mental health because it takes too long. Yeah. And this government is very much on short-termism and the cuts
spinning the profit.
The cuts since 2010 are off the charts, aren't they, in all of these areas, oddly. I mean, even doing a dance around claiming that they've hired more police officers when what they've done is replace some of the ones that they got rid of when Theresa May was Home Secretary. I don't know if you saw the story about hospitals this weekend. Let's just say that if you were expecting 40 new hospitals anytime soon, don't hold your breath. If only someone had suggested at the time that was a load of old rollocks that Boris Johnson was spouting every week at PMQs. Hey-ho, 12:12 is the time. Andrew, take care. Chris is in Cardiff. He says, we were regularly told by CAMS, that's Children and Young Adults Mental Health Services, another sector that is, chronically underfunded and under-resourced. We were regularly told by CAMS, by social workers and by mental health teams to call the police for our son from the age of 15 onwards. He is autistic and regularly attempts self-harm. I've removed him from risky situations myself with the help of the police. Since moving into the community, he's been tasered and arrested. He's currently 18, before spending 7 weeks under voluntary section on a ward. The police are in an impossible situation, James, trying to support other services that are not staffed or equipped to deal with the need. So what do we think of Rowley's intervention then? It's looking slightly more nuanced than it did at 11:30 this morning. Ian's in Scarborough. Ian, what would you like to say?
Yeah, James, I've been a response officer for several years, and I think Matt Rowley's very much been very nuanced is what he's saying. I think he's starting a conversation as opposed to thinking that
you're suddenly going to call time on attending.
No, that's not workable, because the fact is we try at the moment to get ambulance to deal with maybe the less threatening, so to speak, calls, and they just can't. They haven't got the resources to do it. So we find that we go, we ring street triage through like the mental health services. We could be waiting for a call back for an hour, 2 hours sometimes.
Yeah.
And then ultimately they make a decision on what we tell them. They might try and speak to them, to the person that's called, the service user. And you know, we can be there for hours, and sometimes you feel pretty uneasy about leaving people, but you've got to leave it to the mental health professionals. But it's so much of our time; it's unbelievable amount of time, and so I think Matt Rowley knows we're still going to have to attend. But I think he's starting the conversation, which has to happen.
Yeah, and I mean, how else do you start it?
Exactly.
Because you come along and say, I mean, it's a bit of an odd analogy, but he's gone for the just stop oil tactics, hasn't he? Rather than the write an article for a newspaper and hope that people notice tactics. He's gone for the shock and awe, which is right. We're not attending anymore.
Yeah, I don't sort of see there's any other way of doing it. I think he knows deep down that's not workable, and the fact is, a lot of the jobs we go to, because I think people associate it purely with mental health jobs and people who are self-harming and stuff like that, and like people on bridges, the last caller said. Yes. We're still going to go to stuff like that. We're not going to stop. But you can't
be expected to spend, he estimates, 10,000 hours a month on what is principally a health matter, and then he points out that it's equivalent to dealing with 500,000 victims of domestic abuse, the simple staff hours involved in policing mental health. So something's got to give, but it's not going to be scorched earth. It's going to be, well, you know, where's the money going to come from then becomes the next conversation, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Thank you. That was really helpful for me. How long did you say you've been doing the job?
Yeah, 7 years.
So you're not going to, I mean, where it says if there's a threat, an immediate threat to life, you're going to err on the side of caution.
Absolutely.
All the time.
Well, I think people sort of misunderstand in terms of mental health. Our force, we very rarely put people in police cells.
Okay.
But we'll take them to hospital, but then we've got to stop with them because if we leave them, then they'll leave the hospital. They become a high-risk missing person.
Yeah.
And that's all intertwined.
So you can't separate that. That was the perfect. I needed that the police perspective in addition to the ones that we've had it all, haven't we? From people who've needed the interventions, people who provide the interventions, and finally the police officer who attends the intervention. 16 minutes after 12 is the time. 19 minutes after 12 is the time, and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. As Julie points out, that a child cutting themselves may not be at risk of an immediate threat to life, but who would stand by and do nothing? I take this conversation up to 12:30, and then we'll look at the rather less serious business of ITV's current travails, because I think this is it. I think we got there, actually. I wasn't expecting it to go this way. That everyone's correct, and so is Mark Rowley. The acid test, the litmus test here, will obviously be what Jennifer was worried about in the very first call when she said people will die. People would die if the police immediately stopped attending all mental health incidents, except the ones where they felt that the immediate threat to life was obvious and clear. As Ken Marsh of the Police Federation points out, that's unlikely to happen because they will be worried about he says at the end of the day, who makes the decision that you can't go to something? And if, God forbid, this ended up in coroner's court, what does my officer then say? So they will be sufficiently concerned about the consequences of not responding to attend. They will still attend, Ken Marsh says, most calls. But Rowley has raised the unsustainability of the current situation. And the current situation is a consequence of cuts to what you would call the health services. So you will still need police attendance at a lot of incidents, possibly most. I don't know the point at which you think I'm going to call the police about this. But there are crikey, there are matters here that are really important. The question is, will Mark Rowley get the response he needs from either the media or the government? I don't know. 21 after 12. Debbie's in Wigan. Debbie, what would you like to say?
I absolutely agree that it is not the job of the police to turn up to these incidents.
Or at least it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be, but it is.
It shouldn't be. It is. They are taking on the responsibility because nobody else is. The cuts to I've got experience with adult services and children's services. Probably the reason why my adult services involvement has been so severe is because children's services is in an even worse state than adult services. I rang them, that my child's been under them for about 6 or 7 years. We've only had one therapist for a period of a few months during that time. Yeah. They are now 15. They self-harm on a regular basis.
I'm so sorry.
They disassociate at times, so they don't know what they're saying. They don't understand what you're saying to them. They also have additional needs. So, judgments and things, even when not disassociating, aren't sensible. I call.
Well, they're a risk to themselves and potentially to others.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But on a regular basis, when we have, up-to-date meetings with them, they have been told repeatedly that my child will not be honest with them, because they can't bring themselves to say it, and that they're scared to be in a room on their own with them. And each time they insist on seeing them on their own. Obviously, we don't want to be seen as not cooperating, and they come out of that room every single time and say that we are happy that there is no current threat to life or threat to harm themselves. And repeatedly I say, look at the current scars, look at the current wounds, and their answer is always go to A&E or call the police. I called CAMS just less than 2 weeks ago, leaving multiple messages to say she's dissociated, she's cut herself badly, she's trying to get out of the house however she possibly can. I've got 2 other kids.
We need help. We need some help.
We need some help absolutely now. And despite those multiple messages with me sobbing down the phone, they didn't call me back for over a week. They would say that they simply couldn't. Their answer phone was full of mothers sobbing down the phone, and they'd probably be right, wouldn't they? Yeah. But to be honest,
so you called? Did you call the police?
No, I managed to get somebody else to help me. Okay. Track her down. Because to be honest, she's terrified of the police.
Right. So that would have made everything worse.
Absolutely. So, and with adult services, I've been under the crisis team multiple times over 3 years, because once they've dealt with the initial crisis, they pass you on to a recovery team who are then supposed to get you settled on some meds and to get you the right therapy. Now, those don't exist, and those appointments don't exist. So you then go into crisis again, and it's just a never-ending cycle. And the last appointment I had with a doctor, where I was begging him to help me, to say, look, if I have another nervous breakdown when she's in a position where she's going to be at harm, I'm the only one who can protect her. So if you don't make sure that I'm stable by at least trying to change my medication, then she could kill herself. Because I'm not up to the job.
It's like it's like a labyrinth. You turn around one corner, you back up on yourself, you find another. I feel so much for you, Debbie. I really do. I wish there was more I could say that would be of help, except to continue to point out the problems that you've helped us understand and that you have illuminated. But the amount of bandwidth or slack don't sound like quite the right words, but they're the ones I've got, that the police take up in the mental health space is ridiculous and wrong, but no one else is taking it up. So I've completely reviewed my opinion of Mark Rowley as a consequence of these conversations. And as Alita points out, picking up on that phrase, I use shock and awe, comparing it somewhat oddly to Just Stop Oil. She says, you're right, it is. It's the nuclear option. He wouldn't have been noticed if he hadn't done what he's done. They have stated that they're withdrawing their labour in this area. So it's both industrial action and public protest in a way, the tactics of shock and awe, and the if you like, the logistics of a strike or a withdrawal of labour. And that means they'll be listened to in a way that they would not if it was a mere newspaper article or interview. It's still pretty messy. But I think he's done well. I think he's got it. Everyone, I haven't taken a call that's wrong, even though they appear on the outside to contradict each other. Oh boy, Debbie, please do take care. I'm so sorry for what you and your family are going through. Alex is in Eastbourne. Alex, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi there, James. I just wanted to let you know it's the first time I've called in. Thank you. I am a serving Metropolitan Police officer, and I've been serving for about 5 years.
Okay.
This has really touched a nerve with me, so to speak, in a good way, which is why I've wanted to call in. I'm frontline police, and basically there's a couple of points that I'd like to make.
Yeah, of course.
With regards to police officers and the tactic Mark Rowley is using, I think this is a tactic in the sense that there's been another force which has managed to get significant funding to have the right person in the right place. The force slips my mind as to what they're called, but I think we're going down that approach where...
What do you mean exactly? I don't quite understand. So they announced that they would be doing less mental health, and they got the response...
Yeah. Basically, they've managed to get the funding in place to get the right person in the right place, and I think we're going through possibly we're putting it under a lens and saying we need to do something similar. I don't think, though, that this is going to make a huge, significant difference day in, day out, because, like you mentioned earlier, which police officer wants to end up in a coroner's court having to argue a point of why they did or didn't attend a call? I think if there's any... possibility that someone's going to harm themselves or others, then police are obviously going to have to go. But the police officers kind of work many roles, and I think the general public sometimes forget, we act as teachers, we act as social workers, we act as carers, we act as police officers. We're kind of covering a vacuum, which, yes, we shouldn't be doing, and hopefully this will put it under the spotlight and go, actually, we need to get the right resources.
Well, here's the problem then. Here's the problem. He's set the ball rolling, hasn't he?
Yeah.
Effectively, it would seem. I shall look further into the other force that you cite as possibly being part of his motivation. But the fact that Ken Marsh of your union, your federation, says what you've agreed with, most calls will still be attended because you'll be concerned about the consequences of not responding. It could peter out, couldn't it?
Oh, definitely. The amount of calls that we get to people, because obviously we work near the Thames, where people come in from different areas of the UK to visit London just to specifically jump off a bridge. And we have to deal with social media content, people reporting, my friend's gone to London, we don't know where they are, but we know that they're going to London to do something dangerous. We then have to search God knows how many bridges for someone that looks or resembles a certain person. So as another police officer was mentioning earlier that I completely agree with, we're looking for missing persons, people that could be high risk of a missing person. And that does take up, I know it's been highlighted that it might take up about 40% of police time up.
Yeah.
I would argue when you include missing persons and people of that nature, it could be more than half of our working hours are dedicated to. I think that's such a powerful testimony. Thank you. And of course, you open up a newspaper and you're all being accused of spending all your time wearing woke helmets or something instead of being out solving crimes. That can't be very good for morale either. 12:30 is the time. If you are affected by any of the issues that Alex and other callers touched upon, do remember always that the Samaritans are there 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. 116 123 is the number you need if you feel you need to talk to somebody. It's 33 minutes after 12, and I think Sangeeta's in for Sheila today. So until Sangeeta time, we turn our attention next to a story that I can't quite get on top of, and I don't know why. I'm referring to the continuing furore surrounding Philip Schofield's relationship with a young man who came into his life when he was underage and with whom he subsequently embarked upon a sexual relationship. I mean, they're all joining in now, and I don't quite understand. I don't quite understand the... Well, what don't I understand? Well, look, here's a suggestion from Julie, that there is a sort of homophobic double standard in play. Will every male presenter who's ever had an affair, a hidden affair with a much younger woman, also lose their job? I think
what you might describe as the grooming element of this story makes it different. So you'd need to find a male presenter who had first had contact with a young woman when she was underage and then embarked upon a sexual relationship with her when he was overage. I also noted a couple of weeks ago that the programme itself doesn't get that many viewers, relatively speaking. It's a daytime television programme. I think 1 million is a rough mean average for the programme, which means the huge majority of people taking an interest in the story don't watch the programme. Philip Schofield's a slightly different character, given that we grew up with him. If you're my age, you will remember him being in the broom cupboard with Gordon the Gopher. And then another stalwart of the sofa, Eamon Holmes, who until relatively recently appeared to be friends with Philip Schofield, has, he won't shut up about it all. He's lobbing out all sorts of accusations and allegations. It's all quite unedifying. I don't quite know what's going on, okay? So there could be questions that need to be... So the relationship couldn't have been a complete secret, seems to be the contention. I don't know how true that is. Have you ever had an affair at work? Did you manage to keep it quiet? It's not impossible, is it? Especially if you're married. I imagine you sort of keep a lid on things. So can I just do what's going on? And I'll spare you a lengthy introduction. For me, what makes this grim is the grooming element, and I use that word advisedly. As Philip Schofield has stressed, there's nothing illegal took place, but my God, it was incredibly ill-advised. There's something pretty... I want to choose my word correctly on this. There's something... really unseemly, something really seedy about... I feel very sorry for the young man involved in this case. Really, really sorry for him. I think he's obviously been treated abominably, even if no laws have been broken. But why is this story the biggest story in town for 2 weeks? 0345 6060 973. The question I'd really like to ask you, but the problem is that it involves a Conservative politician. It involves Boris Johnson. I'd rather, given the desperation to de-footballify proceedings at the moment, I wish there was a Labour Prime Minister we could think of in a similar category. But is Philip Schofield being held to a higher moral standard than Boris Johnson by the British media? That's a genuine question, and I'd like you to answer it genuinely. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. So there are two questions for you here. The first is yet another nod to the fact that I was once one of the worst show business editors in the history of Fleet Street. Why is this story so enormous? 0345 6060 973. And the second question is Philip Schofield, whose behaviour is gross, in my personal opinion, because of that age element, but is he being held somehow to a higher moral standard than Boris Johnson was by British newspapers and British media? So you can answer either one of those. And if you want to join in, there's only 22 minutes left. It's your best chance all week of getting on air, but you've got to have something intelligent to say, or at least something helpful. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And did Celine Dion meet her husband when she was very young? Someone's telling me, and I genuinely don't know how big a deal you think that element of the story is. But I do know that a serial adulterer and liar who got fired for lying to Michael Howard, for lying to the leader of his party about an extramarital affair. And that's essentially what's happened to Philip Schofield. He's lost his job because he lied about an extramarital affair. And everyone's saying he'll never work again. Boris Johnson did that and came back a year later and a decade or two after that became Prime Minister. So you can tell, I'm just a little bit baffled. And I feel sometimes almost compelled to talk about a story when it's attracted so much newsprint, when it's completely dominated the news agenda. I feel compelled to talk about it, but I'm coming at it from a really odd perspective. I don't currently understand why this story continues to absolutely dominate elements of the UK media. Could you tell me, and possibly the best way to do so is to tell me why you are so fascinated by this story. Do not ring me to tell me that you're not. That is a waste of everybody's time. Ring me to tell me why you are personally so fascinated by this story, especially if you're not that interested in the programme. You've never watched what is it that's going on here that has proved to have such a sort of car crash compulsion? Maybe that's what it is. He was so squeaky clean, he was so successful, so popular, so TV, that the fall from grace has got a sort of human dimension to it that has drawn attention, drawn the public gaze throughout the ages. Anyway, as I say, if you hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. Rob points out very helpfully, Philip Schofield does more than just This Morning. He also does Dancing on Ice and The Cube. How does that change the dynamic of the conversation? I don't think he does either of those anymore, Rob. I've got to be honest with you. I don't think he's going to get back on the telly. And that's where the second element of the conversation comes in. The idea that he's been held to a higher moral standard than an actual Prime Minister who resigned or was fired for lying about an extramarital affair. And it's fair to say that it didn't do his career long-term damage, but the clever money seems to suggest that Philip Schofield's television career is essentially over. I think, didn't King Charles lie about having an extramarital affair? Well, he certainly lied to his wife about it. So is it all about the age of the young man involved? In which case, I do understand, because that for me is by far the grimmest element of the whole story, but I still don't understand the scale, the sheer scale, the unrelenting coverage, and the fact that it has now been running for weeks. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. I guess I don't have a strong opinion, except that what he's done is grim, and yet if it had been a young woman, would it be getting the same coverage that it's getting? I just don't know. I'm interested in what you have to say about it. The call I really want is the slightly embarrassed person who's fascinated by it all. You didn't think you were the kind of person that was going to be pulling up a deck chair for this kind of saga, and yet you are poring over every development and wrinkle as if it were a real. Maybe is it a real life soap opera? Is that what I don't know. I want to stop talking, but I can't stop talking until you start. Rosie's in Hersham. Rosie, what's going on?
Hi. I just wanted to mention that the Queen met Prince Philip when she was 13
Oh,
years
bloody
old.
hell. Talk about a hand grenade. You're bringing the late Queen into it? Good grief. Was she really? Was she?
She did.
Yeah.
And Princess Diana met Charles when she was, I think it was 14 years of age. You know, it seems to be that if there is one class system, it's okay in one certain class. That's good marriage management. You know, you meet people very, very early on. Yeah. And because they're of the right background and the right creed, that, you know...
She was 8. She was 8 when she met Prince Philip. So I don't think anyone's suggesting that either of them had...
No, not at all. But nobody's suggesting that Philip Schofield had a relationship with a sexual relationship.
No, I hadn't finished. Yeah. No one's suggesting that there was even an ambition to have a sexual relationship. I think what's happening here is everybody thinks that Philip Schofield had plans for this lad even when he was 15. Don't they?
Yeah, it's the grooming element.
Yeah.
It's the grooming element. I mean, meeting people when you're of a young age and eventually ending up with them is, you know, it's nothing new. You know.
So why is it getting so much attention then, if it's nothing new?
I think it's as another caller said, I think it's cloaking everything else that's going on. The government at the moment love anything to be blown up that's not about
so the right-wing newspapers are going to stick this on the front page instead of Boris Johnson's latest travails. There may be some truth. There may be some truth in that. Why are you, and you can't pretend that you're not, because you've just phoned a national radio station about it.
You know what? I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller.
There you go then. Why are you so interested in it?
Because I've always thought, I'm very into the royal family, and I've always thought that was odd. You know, that they met so young, and the same with Princess Diana, that they met so young, and nobody ever brought it up. Nobody ever.
Yeah, but that's because posh people only ever mix with each other. If you're posh, I've got posh friends on Facebook, and every single one, anyone who's got 2 hyphens in their name knows everybody else in the country who's got 2 hyphens in their name.
Yeah. No, I understand that. But if you go read Prince Queen Elizabeth's diaries, it says from the day she met him, she knew that was the man she was going to marry.
When did you read Queen Elizabeth's diaries?
Well, there's sections of it.
Are they? Okay. No, I mean, final question then is pretty obvious. If Philip Schofield had been involved with a young woman, would the story feel the same as it feels today?
I don't think it would have got the amount of
sure it would have done
attention.
either. I'm not sure it would have done either. Thank you. Sorry,
lovely.
Rosie, you've taken me right up to the junction, and you've also given me a bit of a scare at the top then. So 12:45 is the time. It is 12:48. There are bad pool clips and there are bad pool clips. So every time Rishi Sunak goes, this is why they've set up television stations designed to let Conservative politicians never have to answer difficult questions. It hasn't quite worked yet, but it will. There will come a time in the same way that certain prime ministers wouldn't go near unfriendly journalists. So soon it will be unfriendly stations. You might even have the pleasure of having someone coming on a little bit later in the day who will tell you the truth about the nonsense that the politician or the prime minister has been spouting earlier or later. So Sunak has been asked questions about Boris Johnson's diaries and WhatsApp messages, and honestly, any hopes among Conservative supporters that Sunak was going to be a sort of safe pair of hands, I think he lays very real claim now. And until this is demonstrated definitively, I'm going to stick to this. I think he might be an AI creation. I've been learning quite a lot about AI lately. If you ask ChatGPT to answer the questions that Rishi Sunak is answering here without actually answering them, I think ChatGPT would sound quite a lot like this.
Well, I think it's really important that we learn the lessons of COVID, and that's why the inquiry was established. And we want to make sure that whatever lessons there are to be learned are learned, and we do that in a spirit of transparency and candour. The government has cooperated with the inquiry. Tens of thousands of documents have been handed over. And with regard to the specific question at the moment, the government's carefully considering its position, but it's confident in the approach that it's taken.
Are you prepared to get into a legal battle with a public inquiry? Some senior legal figures think you'll lose that fight.
Again, not going to comment on the speculation, but we are carefully considering next steps, and the government is confident in its position.
Are you saying that it should be up to ministers to decide what documents are looked at by the inquiry, not the independent judge in charge of it?
Again, government's handed over tens and tens of thousands of documents in a spirit of candour and transparency, because it is important that we learn the lessons of COVID. With regard to the particular question at the moment, we're carefully considering next steps, but the government is confident in its position.
So you might not hand over that material that they're asking for then?
Again, as I said, government is considering next steps carefully, but has been confident in its position and has handed over tens of thousands of documents.
Not all the documents that they've asked.
Tens of thousands of documents today in a spirit of candour and transparency, because it's important that we learn the lessons from COVID, and again, carefully considering next steps.
Candour and transparency. So you're not handing them all over? No, but transparency though. What? It can't be Can we see them all? No, but we've been very transparent, and a spirit of candour. That was ChatGPT, right? I've understood what it is. So you need to say, don't answer any of these questions. Just talk about lessons learned and candour and transparency, and just say all the same words. So slightly paraphrase the late great Eric Morecambe. Just say all the right words, but not necessarily in the right order, or rather say all the same words again and again and again in a slightly different order. It's like my debut on LBC all those years ago, actually, and nobody rang me for an hour and 15 minutes, so I just started saying all the same words in a slightly different order. Still fall into that trap occasionally. Here you go. Bobby's in Bristol. So, James, Philip Schofield had a secret toy boy. There's a phrase I haven't seen for a while. Should this really be news? Honestly? I'm not blaming you. I know it's on the agenda. But do you really think it should be? Well, that, to be fair, in my characteristically cheeky way, Bobby, that's actually the question that I'm asking. So I insulate myself from accusations of spending too much time in the shallow end by asking whether this is actually a bit deep end. Is it a story? Why is it getting so much coverage? These are the questions I'm asking. You mentioned something no one's mentioned thus far. It's being wrongly conflated with his brother's crimes, in my opinion. His brother convicted recently of crimes with a boy. It's horrible behaviour considering his wife, but would there be such a backlash if Holly Willoughby was found to have a secret toy boy? Asked Bobby in Bristol, to which I think the answer is if he turned up on work experience at the age of 15, then that question is pertinent, and I can't answer it. I don't know. I can't think of an example. 12:53 is the time. CJ is in Malton. CJ, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi there, James.
Hello.
How are you?
Very well, thank you. What's on your mind?
So, James, I'm a safeguarding specialist, so dealing with this kind of topic is my bread and butter, really.
Fantastic. Good. I'm glad you were listening.
So, essentially, if Holly Willoughby had started a relationship with a 15-year-old...
No one's suggesting that the lad was 15 when the relationship started. We need to be very, as a safeguarding expert, we need to be very clear about these things.
No, it's very clear. Bearing in mind it's irrelevant as to the sexuality,
yes,
as to the gender. If an adult in a position of power has started any type of relationship...
Oh, okay. So friendship, then, you mean?
Friendship, exactly, yes, with a minor. The power imbalance from Philip Schofield is astronomical, and the opportunities available to this minor was huge. That relationship was nurtured, and then at the moment the child presumably turned 18, it became a sexualised relationship.
Yes.
That is deeply problematic, and it stinks of grooming. As a safeguarding specialist, I would be very concerned about this relationship, and I would have a lot of questions about it. It would raise a lot of red flags. I don't think anyone struggles to understand why, and to steer you violently out of your area of expertise. Do you understand why it's such a massive story? I think I do, because I think we need to be having these conversations with the Rolf Harris, the Jimmy Savile.
Yeah, but no, again, you've got my libel antennae twitching, because they were convicted of child sex crimes. They were convicted of, Jimmy Savile wasn't. He went to his grave unaffected by it. So I need to remind you that no one is accusing Philip Schofield of doing anything illegal, including the young man that he had a relationship with. So, I mean, no, stop talking. Forgive me. You can't bring paedophiles into a conversation about somebody who is not facing accusations of paedophilia.
No, I quite agree with that, and I'm not. What I'm alluding to is the culture of silence.
Yeah.
And maybe we need to be having discussions of power imbalances in relationships. So,
and that's where the story points. No, that's where the story points. It points upstairs at ITV to where questions about what was known and when do actually have a public interest, regardless of how prurient you might find the coverage of this individual story. The public interest kicks in when you wonder about the culture of quietening or the culture of silence in these places. CJ, thank you. 12:56 is the time. Maggie's in Maidstone. I thought this would be easier this week than last week when we talked about it, and everybody knew about reports regarding this relationship, but nobody could say it on air, despite the fact that everybody want to. The producers really had their work cut out. If anything, this has been even more problematical. Maggie's in Maidstone. What would you like to say?
Oh, hello. What I'd like to say is I know Boris Johnson did an illegal thing when he had that party, and it was illegal.
No, but he also had an affair with someone he wasn't married to and lied about it to Michael Howard when he was... I'm not comparing Philip Schofield's current travails with Boris Johnson's party, Maggie. I'm comparing it to him lying about an affair and losing his job as a result, which is exactly what's happened to Philip Schofield.
Yes, I know.
Oh, good.
I think that Philip Schofield has been sitting on, 10 foot above contradiction on his TV programme.
Yes.
Telling us all where we're going wrong. And
Does
Boris
he?
Johnson for that matter.
I thought they just sort of interviewed actors and soap stars and stuff like that.
Yeah, but I've seen him on there talking to people.
Yeah.
And lots of youngsters are influenced by TV personalities.
True.
And if you're a minor on work experience and you go somewhere like ITV, I'd imagine for a minor,
you should be completely...
you
should. That is the point, isn't it? That is what makes it all feel different.
Yeah, and they're starstruck, and he's met Philip Schofield. I expect he thought it was a really great thing. And
Do you understand why the story is so huge?
I think it's so huge because, Philip Schofield
is such a big star. So the size of the star defines the size of the story, and it's only one part. Oh, I was unfair on the lad who texted to say he also presents The Cube and Dancing on Ice, wasn't I? because he was addressing my suggestion that not that many people watched this morning, therefore the story is quite strange, but it's the stature of the star. So my apologies to whoever it was who I dismissed. I think I may even have poo-pooed their text, because you were telling me something I already knew, but I had actually missed that relevance to the broader story. So the size of the star defines the size of the story. I told you I was a rubbish showbiz editor. I don't know that I've ever provided more conclusive proof than I have in the last half an hour. I don't think we'll be going back to this topic at any point in the future. I'm not even sure why we did today, to be honest with you. It was a very unedifying experience all around and deeply unsatisfying. So on you go. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back. I'd skip the last half an hour. Hand on heart. I think it was rubbish. All my bad, by the way. The producer tried to talk me out of it. I was a load of old toot. You can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player or on the Whole Show podcast, although today I would say not the whole show. You'll find all of LBC's shows there to catch up on, as well as Global's live radio stations. So download Global Player for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, Lewis Goodall is in for Tom Swarbrick. And up next, Sangeeta Maiska is in for Sheila Fogarty. 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 Is in for Sheila Fogarty.